Good evening. Nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us. We are going to go ahead and get started with our conversation today. And my name is Jaela Sutherland, and I will be moderating the conversation and introducing our panelists this morning. I will also provide a brief background on how we arrived at this conversation today. Before I get started, I wanted to give a little bit of direction on the webinar. We do have interpretation available. And so if you are able to see the circle with the three dots there, you should be able to click that. And then where there's the globe icon, you can click and choose the language that you would like to hear and use for the conversation today. I'm going to ask if there's somebody here who might be able to copy and paste those instructions into our chat. That should be able to be shared with everybody through chat. And we'll start with presentations from our speakers, but once we arrive to discussion, I think everyone will need to use the Q&A feature in the webinar here. So again, you reach that through that more with the three dots, and you can select Q&A and place any questions there. So hopefully that answers any technical questions that we have as we begin here. But please feel free to leave questions for any of us if you're having any difficulties with audio or visuals. So thank you again. I am Jaela Sutherland. I am on the Secretariat for the Peace in Our Cities Network. Really pleased and happy to have you all with us and to welcome our wonderful speakers here. I am just briefly going to go over a resource that the Peace in Our Cities Network introduced, published at the end of the year last year, which is called Tackling the False Dilemma, a communications guide for advancing balanced and effective public safety approaches. This is a guide that was written for the purposes of, there are three primary goals. First is framing and messaging. It's to offer framing and messaging to advance balanced and sustainable public security strategies. The second goal was to offer evidence to question Mano Dura or tough on crime approaches, and to instead favor balanced and integrated approaches that are rooted and grounded in evidence. And third was to offer communication tools that can help shift public and political discourse. The guide ultimately highlights four evidence-based principles, the first of which is to target interventions on the people and places and behaviors that are most associated with violence. The second is to strengthen community institutions that prevent and mediate conflict. The third is to build legitimacy through fairness, transparency, and respect in policing and justice. And the fourth is to improve safety through strategic, visible environmental design changes. So the webinar today is really an opportunity to drill down into what that means in a particular place. We will explore communication as an underutilized tool at the core of municipal strategies, not in the form of a campaign or political speech, but rather as a conversation. And we really want to look at communications as an opportunity to enhance and strengthen public safety at the local level. So we're also operating, as we all know, in a context of environments that are drowning in false narratives. Sometimes those narratives are malicious. Sometimes they're just ill-informed messaging that gets perpetrated and spread across social media. So in that case, these conversations really must be led by the needs of community members. They must provide accurate, transparent, and useful information about government plans and timelines. They have to support effective consultation and enable coherent collective action, and they must update and guide social norms to support improved safety outcomes. So with that, I will close my opening remarks, but I'm really happy and pleased to welcome our speakers today. Today we have Dr. Paula Maraglia with us. We have Sifilele Ngubisi, and we have Dr. Barbara Holtman. Let me just give a brief introduction for each of you, and then today I believe we're going to begin with Paula. So Paula is going to reflect on harnessing technology to improve communication, particularly in an atmosphere where there are many competing narratives and deliberate intentions to undermine legitimate messaging. Dr. Maraglia is a social scientist and media entrepreneur dedicated to building sustainable, high integrity news ecosystems. She is the founder and CEO of Momentum, Journalism and Tech, and leads a global initiative tackling the complex relationship between big tech platforms and the news industry. Paula is the co-founder and publisher of Gamma Revista and spent 8 years directing Nexo Journal, a pioneering digital news outlet she also co-founded. I feel like I should also mention in 2013, she was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world for reducing gun violence. Paula, thank you so much. I'm going to briefly introduce Sefalele and Barbara as well so that we can move on with our introductions. Or I'm sorry, with our presentation. So after Paula speaks, we'll have Sifilele with us. She's program manager for Productive Cities at the South African Cities Network, and she will present on a community engagement guide that they've created. Sifilele is an urban planner working to support city best practice in South Africa. Her experience and passions are in urban safety governance and youth inclusive urban development. For over 12 years, she has led the South African City Network's thematic focus on the making of safer cities through data evidence, practitioner learning, and exchange. Her work in this space also has international dimensions, having contributed to the development of the UN Global Urban Safety Indicators and Monitoring Tool in 2020. And third, we have Dr. Barbara Holtman, who's director at Fixed Africa. Barbara developed the What It Looks Like When It's Fixed methodology for collaboration in addressing complex social problems as an output of her doctoral thesis. She has a history in communications and behavior change, having established and run a communications consultancy prior to becoming involved in the safety of girls and community safety. She is a feminist, urban safety, and community development practitioner, a director of Fixed Africa, a consultancy and member of Peace in Our Cities that has worked in civil society, government, international donor agencies, and the private sector, developing participative and collaborative practical strategies for prevention of urban unsafety, violence, domestic violence, including violence against children and gender-based violence. With that, thank you so much to all of you for being here. Paula, I will hand the virtual mic over to you. And thank you so much. Look forward to your comments.
Good morning and good afternoon. It's good morning for me, but I guess it's good afternoon for you in South Africa. It's a real pleasure to be here. One thing that I didn't mention, it's not mentioned in my bio, is that prior to becoming a media entrepreneur, a vast part of my career, I worked with crime prevention, both with Barbara and Flavia, who are here. So for me, this webinar is an opportunity to join my two lives, my life in crime prevention and my life working with media and technology. So thank you very much for the opportunity to reflect on that. And I think that it's very timely and extremely important. I see communication as something, as an issue that should be addressed also as a social development issue, the right to be informed, and the impact of being precisely informed, the fact that people who are misinformation plays an important role when it comes to vulnerabilities of all sorts. So I'm really happy to be talking about this this morning. I chose to address some specific points that for me relate immediately to the local dimension of urban safety and the role also that local players could play in this. And I think that I would like to start, and then I'll also address some specific aspects that I believe speak directly to the South African context. I'd like to start addressing the differences when we're talking about information. I think that national news traditionally they get headlines, but what happens at the city level not necessarily get a headline. So we should be asking ourselves, how do people get informed when it comes to national to local news? What are the means? What are the ways that people get informed? And the consequences of that. So we're talking about neighborhood chats. We're talking a lot about of WhatsApp groups. A lot. We're talking about local channels of informations, and this is important because there's a lot of potential there, but also there's a lot of risks and vulnerabilities involved with those channels. I'm not saying that legacy media or big headlines are always the best options, but there are different strategies for us to address information and especially circulation patterns when it comes to information when we're talking about different channels. I think one of them, one specific point also that I would like to make is the dimension of the danger, the risk of crisis amplification when we're talking about this local channel. So you don't have, if you have a local disaster, if you have an environmental disaster, if you have a violent episode, if you have, how how does information does this information circulates when we're talking about a community, when we're talking about a local level, and more importantly, how do we know that the information that is circulating is accurate? I think that we know, and this is typical, and there are studies and there is literature backing this. Misinformation and disinformation uh, has the potential to get widely spread very easily and usually faster than precise information. And this is not by accident. A lot of the misinformation is shaped to have this behavior. And here it comes the role of technology, the platforms where this information circulates. Their business model involves getting the attention of the people, so getting us hooked in the platforms. The time that we spend there is their measure of success. So the more the information is it's shaped in a way that can get our attention, that can hook us to these platforms, the more successful they will be in terms of circulation. So we need to be attentive to that. It has to do with the quality of information, and it has to do also with the structure where they circulate, with the architecture that is built for this information to circulate. So when we're thinking about the role of the local actors, the role of the municipality, the role of the local organizations, I think that we need to address there is transparency, and it was mentioned in the introduction of this webinar. Language that is able to impact, language that communicates, that relates to that specific reality. These are elements that give potential also to information to circulate. I think that when you're talking, you mentioned that I was involved with gun regulation efforts in Brazil and globally. I think that in Brazil we had a gun regulation referendum. I was very young, and I remember that for me it was something that I understood about communication. I had a lot of debates with the people involved with the gun industry. And our conversations were like, they had very strong punchlines, like, oh, if you don't have a gun, you're going to be more vulnerable. If you have a gun, you're more empowered to fight the bandits. Like, always a punchline, always a punchline. And what did we have? We had these statistics. We were like, oh, but if you have a gun, you have 75% of higher chance. Our way of presenting our points, I must say, was boring. It got people tired, was extremely complex, and it lacked a message, a strong message. It wasn't very strategic. This was 20 years ago. I think that we've learned a lot about that. But one thing that I learned is that you need to have a strategy and you need to pick a message. I think that literature also has shown that you need to choose your message. You need to have one strong message, and then you can have several, but in one piece of communication, you need to be able to communicate your most important message. It needs to be language that is clear and language that relates to that specific context. It needs to be also empathetic. I think there's a lot of asymmetry we communicate. We expect, especially when you're talking about government, you expect people to be your audience. You expect yourself to be lecturing them about a specific reality. We don't need to think as people only about audiences that are sitting there to receive information. We need to think about dynamics of engagement. And we need to see these people that we're calling audience as people who are also producing information, particularly when it comes to the local level. They are also sources, and they're sometimes they're more trusted sources than the official ones. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with a reality that has multiple sources? Some of them who are trustworthy, some of them who are not. How do you make this distinction? So I think this is something that makes the communication more complex, but also brings a lot of potential because then you don't need to count only with the official sources that sometimes are considered very distant, very formal, very much not engaged with that local reality. So, which brings me to my other point, which is how do we empower citizens as first responders for information? There's a lot of, not a lot, but there is also some literature talking about this. And I think that to think about community, there is from community journalism to community producing information as first responders that can circulate in a moment of a particular accident or vulnerability. But for that to be happen, this won't happen naturally. I think that then we need to talk about something that is called media literacy. How do we bring media literacy to this conversation? And by media literacy, I'm addressing a multitude of things. For first, how do we communicate better how social media works? What are the incentives? How can you detect a content that is not true, that can be tagged as mis or disinformation? How can you behave so that you don't promote that? Sometimes people engage with this kind of information, not necessarily to promote, even if it's to criticize, but criticism is engagement. If you comment on an Instagram post, even if it's to criticize, you're making its performance better. It's going to become more visible. So there's a lot of the media literacy repertoire that needs to be brought into this conversation in order so people can understand the architecture that today the information circulates. But in the case specifically of South Africa, I think that we need to understand that the conversation about media literacy is also a conversation, and I'm talking about South Africa, but I could be talking about Brazil as well, as we share a lot when it comes to, we are markets where that are very relevant to social media platforms because we're very big markets. But we are also markets where there is a huge inequality when it comes to access to the internet. So when we're having a conversation about media literacy and when we're having a conversation about how digital communication circulates, we're also having a conversation about internet access. When we're talking about a country like South Africa, who can access information, who can be, if I'm talking about citizens that are active, as I said, first responders, also in communication, who are those citizens? These are the citizens who have access to internet. So there is a divide there. We also need to talk about languages. These platforms, they are usually platforms where the main language is the national English in the case of South Africa. But how do you increase access of specific places that language is not necessarily the first language. In the case of Brazil, this is also a conversation about internet access, but it's also a conversation about even the data packages, because they determine what kind of platforms you can access. The other elements that I wanted to bring to regarding South Africa that I think it's important. I think that the Reuters Institute, they launch every year a report about trust in media. And South Africa, unlike other countries, from 50 to 55% of the population declares that they trust media brands, legacy media brands. This is high if you compare to other countries, but Brazil is only 45 and is declining. South Africa, so there is still a high level, a relatively high level of trust, which shows that there is room there to build trustworthy relationships when it comes to communications. Local level trust, on the other hand, is only 36%. So if you combine these two data, I think it's so people trust media brands more than they trust local governments. I think this is a important element when it comes to context for us to think about communication strategies. And finally, I think there is a data that it called, yes, in 2 minutes I will. I think there is a piece of data that also called my attention that I think is extremely important. There is a report that was published by the Competition Commission in South Africa that shows that South Africans use social media platforms, particularly WhatsApp and TikTok, at extremely high rates. So as I was telling you, Brazil and South Africa are we're leading this usage. However, the trust that people have on those platforms is incredibly low. There is a piece of data that shows that only 15 to 16% of people show trust information they see on Facebook. So we have a paradox here. People use those platforms a lot to get informed. However, they don't trust the information that is there. So how do we reconcile all this data that I'm sharing with you? So you have relatively high levels of trust when it comes to national media brands. You have a high usage of social media platforms, but then you have low level of trust of the information that circulates there. I think that to think about a strategy, it's key here when you want to improve the quality of the communication that you have at a local level, and a strategy that needs to address all these points. I will close by saying something that I should have said on the start. Momentum, my think tank, is devoted to work with the intersection between journalism and technology, focusing on the Global South. And my main partners today are partners from South Africa and Indonesia. And there is no accident in that. It's because our markets are extremely relevant, but our level of agency while dealing these platforms is not proportional to the relevance of our markets. So we work together, these three countries, in order to figure out how do we reduce the asymmetry of power that today we have between our markets, and by markets I'm saying the media sector, but the citizens as well, the users of these platforms, and the platforms itself. So I'm happy to be here and to be able to contribute to this conversation, which I believe is a key one for us to have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paula. There's so much in there. I could ask a million questions. In particular, your framing of citizens as first responders. That's really interesting, and it really does get to that agency point that you are making, and the fact that they're also reproducing information, and so thinking about them as on that front line is a really valuable construct of the issue. So thank you so much. I'm going to now hand over the mic to Sifilele. Please join us. And if you have any presentation or PowerPoint slides, you're more than welcome to share your screen. And if not, the mic's yours.
Thank you, Jai Isla. Just figuring out how to toggle with the sharing mechanisms. I'm not very great with Zoom. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Siphelele, as has been introduced from the South African Cities Network. I don't want to kill everyone with slides, death by PowerPoint. I do have them. I'm just going to use them as a guide, but I just want to talk to some of the salient points. So let me just try that again. Just a second. Okay. There we are. You'll let me know if it's visible on your end, and I'll put it on slideshow mode. Please confirm, Jayala, if
Yep.
it's
It's perfect
if it's
for me.
showing. Okay.
You're still in
I'm
it
not in
hasn't gotten into
presentation mode.
presentation mode, but I can see it
Okay.
well. Thank you.
Oh, the toggles on this blocking. Oh, there we are.
There we go.
Blocking the, yeah. Okay, thanks everyone. So
Perfect.
I am from the South African Cities Network. I am a coordinator for a city practitioner platform called the Urban Safety Reference Group. We've worked previously very well with Fixed Africa and a whole lot of other partners represented here. What we do is really we promote city best practice. We do that through various things, including a comprehensive program of research, a whole lot of data aggregated to the city level to tell cities exactly what's happening in terms of crime and violence trends and where. But in doing so, we also think it's important to engage with the not only just the spatial, but the social and economic drivers of violence and crime. So, in addition to the objective picture of crime and violence, we promote quite a lot of, and we drive a very robust research agenda around, the other drivers of crime that can be social, spatial, or economic in nature. Dr. Miraglia mentioned like some of the parallels between South Africa and Brazil. And so some of the, social elements and also the spatial elements, we share quite a lot in terms of our history and the makeup of our countries. And so, as you can imagine, some of the contexts are shared. So what we do as the Urban Safety Reference Group is that we are a platform that primarily supports city practitioners from around 8 of the largest cities in South Africa to really cohere an agenda around crime and violence as something that disproportionately affects our cities. It's more concentrated in the 8 cities that our research covers, but also at the same time, the key crime types, especially the more violent forms of crime, are concentrated in our cities. And so what are the kinds of responses that are needed? And communication is something we've identified in our annual reporting as something that is key in bringing communities closer to the issue. And also another point of our advocacy is around transversal or collaborative or all of government and all of society approaches to prevention, not just addressing things as they happen, but in terms of preventive measures as well. And the importance of community engagement around that. And I've seen that the bulk of my input is really I'm asked to address this aspect of community engagement. So these are some of the guiding policies that drive what we do. So goal 11 of the SDGs, together with the new urban agenda and a lot of national policy as well. We have an integrated urban development framework, a national strategic plan on gender-based violence and femicide, and an integrated crime and violence prevention strategy that all inform some of the advocacy that we drive and some of the data work that we do and overall research and practitioner exchange, learning, and the application of insights as they arise. So I'm not going to dwell too much on our theory of change around, urban crime and violence, but what we do advocate quite strongly along four critical areas is evidence-based safety practice in our cities. We advocate around a critical focus on area-based violence prevention, so those spatial interventions to drive different outcomes, more positive outcomes for the safety of all. A greater focus on a gendered safety lens and gender transformative safety practice within our cities, but chiefly and to do with, effective communication. We emphasize this point around working together. I think the previous speaker spoke very succinctly around communities as first responders. So the working together, while it has different dimensions in the way that we approach it, it has to do with effective and respectful engagement of communications around the issue of safety and crime and violence prevention, moving us beyond just IDP processes or consultative approaches that, stop at just informing and can leave communities feeling very frustrated, unheard, and not part of the process. And Barbara and myself were having a discussion about, the reason why people won't report a burst pipe or, the stripping of public infrastructure is because they don't feel part and parcel of the spaces in which they live. They don't feel part and parcel of the city. They don't feel like the city is a committed and respectful partner. So we really advocate quite strongly around cities demonstrating in very clear ways, that willingness to be better at partnering. And in terms of what the state of safety is in our major cities, we are seeing this progression towards and pivot towards, surveillance-driven safety management as opposed to people-driven practice that tries to engage and bring on board people and communities and residents as partners in an all of society and all of government type of approach to governance and also collaboration. And we're seeing this pivot to boots on the ground, although it's quite important and law enforcement has its role. It's not proven to have translated to a reduction in crime and violence. More cameras have not led to a reduction in the types of crime that we see. And if they haven't, why not? I think there's a missed opportunity from a communication perspective to put forward a drive for strategic communications in a way that brings communities in as partners and that understands that they are the primary affected as well as the first responders. And so we advocate around bringing balance between hard security measures around together or side by side with long-term, primarily social and preventive interventions, where there is shared accountability between the state and the people. And how can the city be? It's quite easy to talk of cities should be better partners, but what are the tangible things and the practical ways in which cities can position themselves and a show of faith and in a way that generates good faith and better relations between the state and residents or citizens or people is collaboration and communication not just as awareness or informing or information, but as a tool for fostering partnership and also a tool for behavior change. And so shifting away from just communicating just to inform, communicating just as to tick a box, but to drive a better relationship between space and people, ownership of space by the people, and in ways that drive change behavior around shared spaces. So what we found in our research is that there's a gap in the toolbox for local safety interventions, and that is the power of communication to influence behavioral change and promote shared accountability for safety and more broadly for development outcomes. And that communication with the direct purpose of changing these behaviors or undesirable behaviors can assist in creating shared accountability for law-abiding and properly regulated societies. Hope may be at the center of this message, a realistic but optimistic shared vision of what could be in our cities. And to that, the gap that we've picked up in our, continued engagement around this topic is that sometimes cities struggle with, if not outright fail, to manage expectations. So we've spoken about the advent or the rise of misinformation and disinformation, but there's something to be said about poor communication and how it compounds some of the frustrations that residents, citizens, and people may have with our systems. And so there's a need for, communication to be clear, simple without losing complexity, and coherent. And that's respectful of the audience. And I'll share just some examples of, good practices in communication versus not so great ones. And that, in the failure to manage expectations, it drives that distrust that also then compounds social unrest, and doesn't allow social cohesion to take place, and it compounds the frustrations and distrust and outright anger of communication of communities at the state. Hence, we advocate quite strongly around designing community engagement processes in ways that are sensitive, respectful, and that are designed to build and to re-establish a frayed fabric of trust between the state and the subjects of governance. And that, I said something about being simple and clear without losing complexity. And I think there's that gap and that challenge of how do you communicate things that are rather complex to people in a way that is succinct and that they can engage with. And to share just on the South African context, or perhaps I should come to these after I've finished sharing the slides. So there's another point to be made around safety as everyone's business. So quite a critical point of our advocacy as the Urban Safety Reference Group is that safety is everyone's business. So there is a nexus or intersection between governance, services, development, health and safety, and our communities. And that there's an opportunity in leveraging this idea of safety as everyone's business in a city, both in a city system and in a city as the built environment, the lived environment, for everyone to have cognizance that I have a contribution to safety. But in terms of safety within a city institution and a city administration, I think there's quite a critical opportunity to drive internal city communications and for units or departments responsible for city communications to be driving that communication internally of growing the consciousness about safety as everyone's business. So, for example, what does a unit responsible for parks and public space, have to do with safety. The unit responsible for electrification and lighting, for refuse collection, for the one responsible for the cutting of overgrown vegetation. These units might not immediately see their role in safety, but they are inextricable to a safer city. And as it stands, quite a lot of cities are driving this lobbying of other units to understand what their role is in safety. But as it stands in most cities, safety is seen as the function of units that are responsible for public and some of them call it community safety. So there's really a missed opportunity there in terms of internal and also external communications in terms of the communities at large about what they can do to promote a safer city. So I come to now some of the examples that I wanted to talk to about good and bad practice when it comes to effective and impactful communication that stimulates and promotes partnerships across the board. So for me, and Barbara asked me this question and I was stumped at the time, but as I thought about it, I remembered that I was quite impressed. There was a time where City of Cape Town was dealing with the possibility of running out of water. And so they drove quite an impressive communications campaign around this idea of day zero. It's quite grim and apocalyptic, but it was such a well-executed communication campaign that drove behavior change in the residents and that enabled and allowed the residents to kind of own this agenda and change their behaviors around water. However, it's a pity that once the city kind of recovered in terms of where it stood on water, those behaviors kind of fell away and people reverted to their usual ways of using and engaging with water. It would have been great to see that behavior sustained and for it to become something that is general practice in South Africa, particularly being that we are a water scarce country. So that's one example for me of excellent behavior change communication that moves beyond informing and kind of this doomsday kind of thing. So some examples.
I'm so
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. I just wondered if I could give you one more minute.
Yes, I'll run through. I'll try to breeze
Thank
through
you. And we can
the
come
rest.
back to more in conversation as well.
Excellent. Will do. Thank you so much. So some examples that we have, and I won't have the time to go through them one by one, what we tend to see in our public domain, and particularly when it comes to our politicos and how they communicate, is that it's rather PR heavy, it's signaling, and it really doesn't resonate with people as anything that should change the way that they engage, particularly around, shared resources. But you will have heard also that in South Africa, we have shifted from a political context where we have, one party running a particular municipality to one where there is a diversity of political parties. So what we call political instability, in that we have a lot of municipalities run by coalitions. And what I've observed is that we are shifting somewhat from a situation where you have what we call political instability, where city administrations are unpredictable. You went from one party being in an administration for a full 5-year term and clear accountabilities to one where a term is not guaranteed. A vote of no confidence can come through. And although we've shifted from relative political stability to instability, what is increasingly happening is also that the instability is kind of morphing into predatory governance. And, the ways in which, and that has to do also with this aspect of misinformation, disinformation, and quite a lot of the politics, leaning more on misinformation and disinformation for political gain. And I think I want to end on the point on the point of looking to harness communications as something that should be respectful of audiences, that should look to drive partnerships, not just drive partnerships, but also generate trust between the state and the governed. And this speaks to quality community engagement on key issues, moving beyond the mechanical things, which can be just around informing and really respecting communities as critical partners and collaborators in the making of cities that are safer and livable for all. I'll end it there, Jai, and thank you for the opportunity to share the perspective of SACN and the Urban Safety Reference Group. Thanks.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sifilele. I think, unsurprisingly, there are some consistent themes and topics between the comments you shared and those of Paula earlier. Of course, talking a lot about trust, but I think that specific emphasis on building relationships, the agency of the community, and of course, the clear and concise messaging. Another point you made that really resonates is also the different components of government units seeing themselves as part of the full safety picture. And I think you're very right that familiarizing everyone with their role there is a really crucial part in building those coherent messages as well. So I will now turn over to Barbara, whom I completely forgot to share what you'll be sharing with everyone about today, which is the Municipal Safety Case Studies project that has now released its call to action. So I'll say no more. I will give the floor to you, and we'll go for 15-ish minutes, and then we'll open up for conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jaela. And yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting to listen to the other voices here saying things that I think, we essentially need to keep saying. And yeah, I think one of the things that we know about South Africa, and Paula has referred to it, is that there are very low levels of trust in South Africa. People don't trust anybody essentially anymore, and nobody trusts anybody. It's really, I think it's one of the hardest things of working in our field, and I'm sure Spear can support that people don't trust each other, and nobody trusts local government, and local government doesn't trust the people. So very often what we see is that there will be political messages from local government, as Super calls them, signaling, but there's very little honest discussion or transparent discussion. And communications is very rarely seen as a tool that could actually help forge relationships and build that trust aligned around the interests of both community and government. And community members are hardly ever seen as assets in reducing criminal behavior. And this is a huge gap, and one that we believe really needs to be promoted. So although communities have a huge vested interest in law-abiding public spaces, people are not actually invited to help make them safer. So community communication skills, when municipal officials are thinking about communication, I think that one of the major things that happens is that people are really rude to municipal officials because people are very disappointed in the state of our municipalities and of our cities. Our cities are exhausted. They're so tired. For 30 years, they've been trying with very little assistance from anyone to recover from the fact that before 94, they only had to serve 10% of the people, and now they've got to serve everybody. And the infrastructure doesn't work properly, the capacity isn't there. At the change in 1994, and the city's lost an enormous number of engineers and other capacity. And I think that city officials take the brunt of the blame for what doesn't work and for what is unsafe at local level. And that unsafety goes from everything to the fact that, I mean, I have this thing about how people just dig up cities in Joburg. Whenever there's a problem, someone comes and digs a hole to find the pipes or to find whatever the problem is, and then they never bother to fill it in again. And so you have these endless holes, and this makes it very unsafe for people to walk from place to place in many settings. Also, we have very high rainfall at times, and bushes and trees and grass verges become overwhelming and also add to unsafety, and nobody communicates about it. I think that if there were a much more mutually supportive and useful relationship between the cities and communities, things would be a lot safer, because communities would be much more likely to assist in saying what the problem is and in helping fix it. And yet, in this situation, there is none of that. The other thing is that cities in South Africa are required by law to consult on the integrated development plans. Very small percentage of people actually participate in those community consultations. In fact, the latest figures that I've seen are that something like 20% of people take any interest at all in the IDP, and that young people in particular take virtually no interest in those consultations. And of course, a lot of the problem is that people who do contribute and who come up with ideas, everybody goes, yes, yes, that's a great idea, but there's no capacity or resource to actually deal with it. The capacities and resources are already very strained, and so promises that are made are very unlikely to be fulfilled. And it's obviously nerve-wracking to have to admit that you're not going to be able to do some of the things that people are wanting you to do, but it would seem to me to be the sensible place to start, to actually be honest and transparent, to be reliable, to be interested in the concerns of people, but not to make promises that they are going to fix them. And the issue of managing expectations, I think, is absolutely huge, and we see very little of that happening. And then the thing about communications is that it can be personal and responsible to real needs, but we very rarely see that with our cities. And both Paula and Siphelele have talked about the language used. I think also we look at some very simple principles about communicating. The one is, let's try positive messaging. Let's try and tell people what they could have if they behaved differently, instead of criticizing them for what they don't do. South Africa is drowning under litter. It's drowning under waste. And telling people that they are bad people for doing that is not actually going to change the way that they work. I think everybody wants to be useful, and it would be so much more sensible if local government could actually have a call to action, make people useful, ensure that that the communications that they make are relate to the priorities of their audiences, and, as Siphelele said, keep the messages very simple and clear and accurate. It's no good telling people something if you don't know that what you're telling them is actually true. And I think very often we have this problem. We're in an election year, and we had a situation 2 weeks ago where the minister from the Treasury said that Joburg was absolutely dead broke. And 2 days later, the mayor said, no, we're not. We're passing a perfectly normal budget. And I think that kind of conflicting messaging is absolutely awful, because nobody actually then trusts anybody in anything that they say. So we've worked in a number of settings where we've worked with the need to communicate, and these three just are an example of the kind of communications that we use. The first one is saying, if you are damaged, hurt people hurt people. Don't don't use your hurt to hurt somebody else. Instead, heal your hurt so that you don't actually hurt anyone else, and you'll all be a lot better. So the idea of peace in the home starts with me. The second one is about a project that was happening in a city where there was a huge attempt to try and make a particular area safer. And so we tried to use visuals to actually show what people would like to see in that space. And we use a process called what it looks like when it's fixed. And we very often ask people to draw what it is that they would like to see. And extraordinary thing about that is it's never greedy. It's always just that it is safe to do what everybody needs to do, and that you will not actually be hurt or injured in that process. And then the third one is this poster about the call to action on South African cities and gender-based violence, which Tepelele already showed you. So what we promote in our work is that, first of all, municipalities are uniquely positioned to change the conversation and the relationship between people and government, uniquely positioned. And in our constitution, there is very specifically mentioned that local government is not just devolved government from national and provincial. It is a tier of government that is independent, and it can have a relationship with the people that live in a way that other spheres of government don't have that opportunity. And then we would like to see people, political leaders, working to support public safety officials with communication strategies and tried and tested behavior change strategies. It should not be made up by the local government. There is excellent research, as everybody has mentioned, and we should really be using that research as the basis for everything that we communicate. And then to offer real partnership. And I think this is part of the problem, that our cities are not sure they want to have a partnership with us because things are tough. And they know that everybody finds them tough. And that people who can afford to very often opt out of government services to whatever extent they can, because there is such a lack of trust in government services. But the cities can't do it without us. And therefore, we believe that real partnership is essential to communication, and that shared accountability, shared transparency. I mean, the reality is that in a democracy, in the end, it's on us. And cities have to trust us to be there to share that accountability. Don't pretend to achieve what you can't. I mean, every time you call a call center in South Africa, you are told the turnaround time for your problem is 48 hours. No, it's not. It's weeks, sometimes months. Say so, and people won't all constantly be disappointed. Establish ground rules for communications and then stick to them. Don't suddenly come out with something else. Create some kind of sense of expectation, of reliability, of consistency, so that people can actually know and understand what you're asking of them and what you're telling them. And then provide regular feedback. If you can't do something or something fails, tell us why. Tell us what failed and tell us what you're going to do about it. Don't just disappear with your tail between your legs. And then treat everyone as an equal, because everybody has something of real value to offer. I think that's such an important issue. Very often, people who spend a lot of their lives on the streets are the ears and eyes that could make us safer, and yet often they're treated as criminals simply for being there. And then, really, we need to have some hope that we're going to get safe. We need to understand what it is that we're trying to achieve, and we need to live within the realms of hope and possibility. And really, I think, stick to the issue that everybody wants to be useful. Throughout our work, we have never found anybody who doesn't want to be useful in improving their own circumstances and those around them. And it's the same of parents who want their children to be safe. It's the same of people in the community who want to be able to trade, who want to be able to walk safely. And we need to trust people. We need to trust their better instincts. We need to have higher expectations of the people that live in our cities and towns so that everybody can ultimately be useful. And it's an ongoing conversation, and we should be having it constantly. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to give you back 1 minute of our time because I know we're over. So thanks very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much. And I really so much appreciate the changing of the frame that you're offering here, which is understanding that there are problems within communication and there are problems with violence, but if we look at communications as an opportunity to be participatory and to have the agency in solutions, then it's a much more positive framing, and I think that really resonates through the comments that you made. I think I will begin with one question for either for any of the three of you to respond to, and then just as a reminder to those, yep, Louisa just added a comment here, but you can submit, for those of you in the audience, you're welcome and encouraged to please submit questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom, the panel of options there along the bottom of the screen. I'm curious, we've talked a lot about trust building and relationship building, as well as the need for clear and simple messaging, which in theory sound there that the idea is very clear. The practice is obviously challenging. And I'm curious if the three of you or any of the three of you would like to reflect on more of how simple messages have led to building trust, or examples of simplified messaging that's really working. Because it does, as you said, the case is there, the information and the data and the evidence is there that is what is needed. And so sometimes just engaging more with what is working is helpful in kind of bringing that to light. So I'll start there, and then I'll keep an eye to the Q&A for others to join in.
I can comment.
Okay, Paula, go for it.
No, no, I want to give an example. I think there are many ways to approach this question. I think that we could discuss like messaging itself, like the how to build a message. But I want to give an example that I think it might illustrate. It's not the only answer, but I think it's one that we need to contemplate. So Brazil has excellent when it comes to research about food system. We have our top researcher is among the top global researchers on food systems. We are a leading country discussing the ultra processed foods. We have public policy materials. So it's a conversation that's happening in the country. However, so we have a lot of information and data about the consequences of eating ultra processed foods. We have public campaigns. We have a lot of tools. But then the industry of baby formula understood that they could work with very popular influencers in Brazil on social media that would do a campaign with their baby kids, talking about how formula has helped them, a woman, a very busy woman, a very busy business and successful businesswoman, how baby formula helped her guarantee that she could be like the mother she wanted to be, and a very successful bit. I'm giving this example here because there is no science, there is no evidence, there is nothing that can beat an Instagram influencer with 3 million followers sitting with her beautiful baby child talking about the benefits of baby formula. Even for those women who don't need to use baby formula. So I think that we need to, when we're talking about messaging, we need to look, it's not the only answer. I think there's like many other answers, and I'm sure they will be discussed here. But we also need to look into how the digital is approaching communication, because people are there. People are consuming information in the digital spaces. So we need to understand how the messages are being built there. We need to understand how people are engaging with the messages that are circulating there. And for that, we need to look at the different industries as benchmark, not because we want to copy what is bad. And I don't think we have the room. Like we had a meeting with a group of civil society organizations here in Brazil, and of course, one thing that we discussed, we don't want to use the same tactics. We don't want to, but we need to understand them. I think there are lessons to be learned there, and we need to we cannot stay in our bubble only. It won't. It's not enough, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with that, Paula. I think that in terms of effective, simple messaging, our health sector and the activists in our health sector have been the most successful. So we still have a problem with HIV and AIDS, but people started to wear T-shirts that said HIV positive. People started to demand very, very clear, make very clear demands around HIV treatment. And people made very simple and clear messaging around what what kind of partnership they required with government. And I think we need to take some lessons from that. I think that social behavior change messaging has been more successful in the health sector than in the safety sector. Although, let me say this, that our private security sector, and we all know about the securitization of cities all over the world. Our private security sector makes claims that really work for people. They market themselves on the grounds not, and I think you said it earlier, Paula, that we're kind of almost apologetic. It's like the gun lobby. We're almost apologetic. We say, hey, listen, as B said earlier about the security, we know that surveillance cameras don't actually stop crime. But we say it with statistics, we say it with complicated academic stories, we prove our case. Private security is one of the fastest growing industries in South Africa because it says we make you safe. They don't even justify it in any way. And last year, I did exactly that we shouldn't be doing, which was I tried to respond by proving that it wasn't true. And nobody cares because once somebody's told you that they're making you safe, that's fine. Okay, I'll go with that. You can tell me as much as you like that 7,000 cameras in Joburg have contributed to 2 arrests. I feel safer when there are cameras. You can tell me as much as you like that the cameras are an invasion of my privacy. I don't care. Makes me feel safer. And I think I think your point, Paula, is very, very important that we need to be more assertive, and we need to take our lessons from campaigns and messages that are incredibly simple. I love New York. you know, and HIV positive, and world peace starts at home. These things are messages that we need to come top of mind when people are thinking about safety. We have a huge problem with alcohol abuse in South Africa. We talk about it in terms of the fact that we have the highest rate of fetal alcohol syndrome in the world. In some towns in South Africa, 28% of babies are born with fetal alcohol syndrome. The fact is that South Africans drink because they're depressed, because they're angry, because they're traumatized, because it's Saturday, because tomorrow is Monday, because it's a funeral, because it's a wedding. We need to learn from them, and we need to find a way to make the same kind of inroads as the people that, as you say, have messages that we don't want. If I try and think about a really great communications campaign for safety in South Africa, can't think of one. The closest I can come is to a kind of a point of sale campaign we ran when I was in the Department of Safety and Security, which was when you buy from a person that stole what you're buying, I can't remember exact words, but essentially the message was, if you buy from someone who stole those goods, you might as well have stolen them yourself. And that had quite a big impact. And yeah, but I think we really need some very good lessons, Paula, from you.
Paula, please come in, and Sifilele, you're welcome to jump right in after Paula.
I just want to share very briefly. There is an NGO in Brazil called Sou da Paz, and they work with public security and public safety in Brazil. And they just did a survey, a very big survey with people here in Brazil. And we are currently a very polarized society, and everything like security and public safety is a very politicized issue. But they found there's a lot of room to work when it comes to messaging. They found with the survey that people are more willing to engage with to address something that you said, Barbara. They get what we say because there is no alternative. Like they get what the private security say because there is no alternative. So you need to build some storytelling. You need to build some message, but also based in data and address that people are afraid, that fear is an important component, but they also saw what it works
and trauma.
Exactly. So I think I think it'll be interesting to talk to them because they're right now working on like building new messages based on the survey that they've done, particularly to address these issues that we have been talking here.
Would love to do that.
Thank you for those. And if I may, I just wanted to expand on what I was talking about with regards to an example of good practice, to agree with Barbara that I can't think of any that has to do with safety. But the City of Cape Town's campaign to avert day zero. I hope you can, oh my gosh, I hope you can see that slide there. So this is it. So we did a piece of work that looked at what partnership and collaboration and communication looked like for Cape Town. It was quite positive because it also took an issue that was quite complex and gave people a granular and practical idea of exactly what was expected of them and how they can be a partner in the process. So a breakdown of your use of 50 liters a day and exactly how much to use for what? 10 liters for laundry, 10 liters for showering, showers of no more than 3 minutes, 9 liters for flushing, 1 liter for cooking, etc. And, you know, simple things like perhaps think about changing your plants and get more succulents so that and also plants that are indigenous so that they use less water. Targeting things that are very practical in people's daily lives and also communicating with them in a way that will change their practices. And some of those changes have been long term, although I did mention that it's a pity that some of those things kind of were up in the air once the crisis was averted. There are those things that sustained just in how people think about how they move around the city, what they have in their houses. Some of the infrastructure changes in that in a lot of businesses, which the city targeted quite strongly as well. They changed the taps to be ones that don't gush out water, but that spray water. So that's way less. So in the airport in Cape Town and quite a lot of places across the country now, you no longer have taps that just gush out liters of water just for one hand wash, but it's like a spray that allows you to keep clean but also save water. So I think, yeah, that's it from me in terms of just lessons from what I think is an excellent example of a collaboration and of a communication campaign that promotes collaboration across society around a critical issue. Thank you.
That visual is so helpful. And I think you're right that the just having something that people can immediately connect with and react to that's practical is also something that's so important. And I think that's also where we struggle in terms of that kind of shared awareness and agency around like what is safety and how do we feel safe and translating some of those lessons learned from a particular industry or experience in a certain moment to more broadly, what does safety feel like and maybe even from the citizens themselves, we maybe think about and experience safety in different ways and aren't necessarily connecting that safety is more than just the presence of certain units of the police on the streets, but it's also clean water, equitable access to information, safety in the home. So I'm curious about honesty and a lot of the discussion around managing expectations and pitfalls that city leaders can fall into sometimes in terms of where to find that balance in managing healthy expectations. I'm curious if any of you would like to speak more on that.
I mean, I'd like to respond very quickly to that, just to say that I think that what we need to remember is that relationships between the cities and the people in South Africa are so bad that, I mean, we have a local government election, but the prediction is that the turnout is going to be miserable because nobody trusts local government and nobody thinks that anybody's better than anybody else. So I would say that being honest right now would actually be a very good place to start. Because if government were honest about how difficult it is and why, and what they intend to do about that, and how important it is for us to actually work with them, I think they would not do any harm. I really do. I spoke to somebody from our electoral commission this week and asked her about what is expected out of the local government election, and she said it's looking absolutely dire. That that people just can't be bothered to vote. And I think that that is a very loud call to say, talk with us, don't talk at us, don't make us more false promises. We've lived a long, we didn't arrive yesterday. We know how bad things are. And if you're honest and you tell us what we can do to help and you build a relationship with us, then maybe people will actually vote. And maybe the city can start to turn around. It was very interesting. I came back from the World Urban Forum on Sunday morning, and I was standing in the queue, in the passport queue. And because of my age, and I'm a white woman, some old white guy said to me, "Oh, it's always so depressing to get back to Johannesburg. Look at how poor the service is and all the rest of it." And I said to him, "You know what? You know what I think you should do? I think you should turn around and leave on the very first plane because I don't think anybody's going to miss you. But what we need in Johannesburg is not people who come back here and feel depressed. I don't feel depressed. I love it. I just want to be able to help make it better. And I mean, he was, rightfully quite shocked at my approach, but I had had a very long journey. And but the interesting thing was that I then had that conversation with somebody at the IEC, and she said the interesting difference between a city like Johannesburg and a place like the States is that huge numbers of people are rightfully absolutely sick and tired of Donald Trump, but they're still loyal to the States. They can't stand him being in Washington, but they still love Washington. And we don't have that here. We don't have that loyalty in that relationship. And I think that if we want to achieve anything in our cities, if we want to be safe in our cities, then somebody needs to be honest with us and somebody needs to let us in to participate in the change, to be the change, as the cliche goes. Let us have agency in what we want to see in our future.
Are there experiences of city leaders being honest in the way you're describing that have backfired? Is there any reason why that kind of
Here
messaging is, yeah. I mean, I'm just curious if it's been socialized or if it's just kind of typical face saving.
I I think nobody knew in 1994 how hard it was going to be to change from a society that cared about 10% of its people into a society that cared for 100% of its people. I don't think the new government had any idea. I think the only people who knew were the people in the old government who handed over in a peaceful way. I think the reason they did it was they knew that there was so much to be done and that it was going to be really, really hard to do. But since then, I don't think anybody, any local government leader has actually, yeah, I mean, it's been an endless litany of wasted money, of unsafety, of corruption, etc. And so I think local government leaders hide away and they're petrified of saying things. I worked for the Minister of Safety and Security at a time when, as the head of communications, at a time when South Africa was known as the rape capital of the world. He wouldn't talk to CBS 60 Minutes, so they doorstopped him. And from a communication person's perspective, it was an absolute nightmare because he wasn't prepared. He made light of it. It was absolutely awful. And for me, the lesson that I learned then was I didn't try hard enough. I tried to get him to speak, but I didn't try hard enough. If I were a communications person for any government, local government in South Africa, I would be saying now, be honest. Tell people how hard it is and ask them to help. Because if you don't, the relationship is already destroyed. I mean, I don't know, Spare, do you know of any local government leader who's actually communicating honestly at the moment with their people about the state of safety? I don't think so. And I think it's fear.
Yes, I'm also really struggling, and especially being that it's a local government election year,
Yeah,
everything is in flux, and you're seeing that communication is a whole lot of it is rather gimmicky, a whole lot of
totally.
signaling, a whole lot of like just PR stunts,
Yeah.
rather than clear, and it's had very adverse effects in that it kind of began to distort. I mean, there's basic things that a regular person on the street doesn't understand about the complexity of governance, the tendency to conflate national issues with local government issues, and a whole lot of political campaigning that deliberately distorts. So I spoke about what I'm beginning to call predatory governance. The theory is yet to be proven. I'd have to do a whole lot of work just to solidify that thinking. But yeah, what it does do is that it continues to entrench the disinformation and kind of distorts people's understanding about government and governance, and what is the responsibility of national government and the things that are going on at that national level, and also what is going on in terms of your local level. And so that conflation is what, in my view, and what I'm beginning to call kind of this morphing of political instability to out and out just politicos being predatory in the way that they are exploiting rather than engaging people so that they can be partners towards creating the kind of cities, the kinds of spaces that we all want to live in. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, fear-driven lack of communications, you know, when there's no trust. Why are you so fearful of being honest? You know, I think it's not being thought through.
Well, I wonder if maybe we should leave it with that. I think there's you know, you've made a strong call to action with honesty, with clear messaging, with learning about what's working and pulling lessons learned from others and translating them into the priorities and the goals for safety, and giving agency and recognizing the agency of the citizens themselves in participating in making safety, and also important to building those relationships that are built on trust. Another interesting term that was used both for government actors as well as for the citizens themselves is that they're frontline actors, carrying different roles and responsibilities, but perhaps also recognizing that they're coming from different positions of stress. And so having honest conversations about, you know, citizens who are experiencing a lack of safety on the front line of that, also on the front line of understanding what it is they need and asking for what they need, while government actors are on the front line of responding to the budgets at hand or the various pushes and pulls on their time and their availability, even their understanding of what solutions actually work. And so understanding that frontline stress of all those actors is an important awareness issue when it comes to building the messages and the strategies that will work. So I might just thank the three of you so much for coming to this conversation, for being so open and sharing so much about where the opportunities are, while we understand so much of the obstacles that we're faced with today. But if you have any last words, you're more than welcome to say them. And thank you everyone also for attending our webinar today.
Thank you very much. Really, really great to have the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, agreed. Thank you so much for opening up the platform and yeah, helping us to consider something that, you know, might be overlooked, but that's critical. Who would think that, you know, communications is a catalyst for a safer city, right? We think it's the policing, it's the guns, it's the criminal justice system, but it's all really in just talking and talking effectively, truthfully, etc. So thanks.
Yes.
And relationships.
Yeah.
Thank
you so much, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.